You think your dog is shaking because it's cold, but that assumption is exactly what causes most people to miss what's actually happening underneath. Because in many cases, trembling has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with what the body is trying to hide. And once you understand the real triggers, you start seeing those small shakes very differently. Most people never realize that shaking is not a single symptom. It is a final expression of multiple systems under stress at the same time. And what nobody tells you is that the body rarely shakes for no reason. It shakes when regulation fails. There is one critical pattern that separates harmless trembling from something serious, but we'll come back to that later. At the surface level, you might notice your dog lightly shaking while resting, or trembling slightly when sitting next to you. It looks random. Sometimes it disappears in minutes, sometimes it comes and goes. And because it's not constant, the brain labels it as normal variation. That is the first mistake. Because biologically, shaking is not random movement. It is muscle activity triggered by nervous system signals that are no longer fully controlled. In simple terms, the body is sending repeated error signals and the muscles are reacting without smooth coordination. That is not comfort behavior. That is instability. One of the most common hidden causes is pain, but not the kind of pain that makes a dog cry or limp dramatically. Dogs don't express pain like humans. They suppress it, so instead of obvious reactions, the nervous system leaks it through small tremors. You might see it when they lie down, when they try to relax, or even when nothing is happening at all. That's because the body cannot fully turn off discomfort. It can only redistribute it. And here is where most people go wrong. They look for dramatic signs. But pain-related shaking is subtle, almost quiet, like the body is trying not to attract attention to itself. It's not a cry. It's a controlled failure of balance. But pain is not the only reason. Sometimes shaking is metabolic. That sounds technical, but it simply means the body is struggling to maintain stable energy levels. When blood sugar drops or hydration becomes unbalanced, muscles start misfiring. But the result is trembling, especially in the legs or lower body. And what makes this dangerous is how normal it can look at first. The dog may still walk, still respond, still appear fine, while internally the system is destabilizing. There is another layer most people completely overlook: emotional stress. Dogs don't just shake from physical problems. The nervous system itself can overload. Loud environments, separation anxiety, unfamiliar situations, or even prolonged internal discomfort can push the nervous system into a heightened state. And when that state doesn't resolve, the body releases that tension physically, through shaking. This is where the misunderstanding becomes risky. People assume emotional shaking is harmless. But prolonged stress is not harmless in biology. It keeps the body in a constant state of alert, which drains energy reserves and weakens recovery systems. So what starts as just anxiety can slowly shift into physical exhaustion. And here is the open loop you need to hold on to. Not all shaking looks like shaking. Sometimes it looks like subtle muscle stiffness before movement. Sometimes it looks like hesitation before standing. Sometimes it looks like uneven balance when your dog first gets up. The visible tremor is actually the late stage of a much earlier process. Now consider something most owners never connect. If shaking appears alongside reduced appetite, low energy, or unusual quietness, the meaning changes completely. At that point, it is no longer isolated behavior. It becomes a pattern of systemic stress. And this is where the real risk begins. Not in the shaking itself, but in what the shaking is connected to. Because the body does not fail in one system at a time. It cascades. Nervous system instability affects muscles. Muscle instability affects movement. Movement changes affect behavior. Behavior changes affect eating. And suddenly what looked like just trembling is actually part of a larger breakdown in regulation. There is also a critical fear point that most people ignore. Sometimes shaking appears before any visible illness, before vomiting, before fever, before clear signs. That makes it one of the earliest detectable signals, but only if you understand what you are looking at. Otherwise, it gets dismissed as nothing. And this is the moment that changes everything, when the shaking becomes consistent in calm environments. Not after activity, not after stress, but during rest. because that tells you the body is no longer reacting to external triggers. It is reacting internally. That is when the system is no longer just responding, it is struggling. At that point, waiting becomes the biggest mistake, because the longer the internal imbalance continues, the more the body compensates in silence, until compensation itself starts failing. So if you ever see your dog shaking without obvious cause, and especially alongside subtle behavioral changes, the real question is not why is this happening sometimes, but what changed inside the system that made normal regulation unstable. And if this makes you look at those small tremors differently, that is the point. Because in biology, the smallest signals are often the earliest warnings. And the earliest warnings are the only ones that give you time to act before the system starts escalating beyond subtle control.